Throwaway account because some of my coworkers lurk here. Also, English isn't my first language, so sorry in advance. I had only been at the company for a month when I realized something was very wrong. Not new job anxiety wrong, not imposter syndrome wrong. More like you don't actually exist here as a human being wrong. On paper, this job was a win. Decent salary, a recognizable company name, an office with glass walls and motivational posters about innovation and team spirit. After 2 years of bouncing between short-term contracts and being told I was promising but not quite ready, I needed stability. I needed a place where I could finally prove myself. I came in quiet, focused, and overprepared. No connections, no internal recommendations, no powerful last name. Just a resume. No one really bothered to read past the first page. I noticed that immediately during my interview. My future boss kept glancing at his phone while I explained my experience, nodding at random moments like he was listening to a podcast in the background. He hired me anyway. Later, I learned why. They were understaffed and under pressure. Someone had quit abruptly, and they needed a body. Anybody. Preferably one that wouldn't argue about overtime or ask too many questions. From day one, my boss made it clear I was temporary. Not officially, of course. HR smiled, welcomed me, gave me a branded mug, but he made sure I understood my place. He never remembered my name. Not once. I corrected him twice in the first week. After that, I stopped. He called me the girl, the new one, or just snapped his fingers in my direction during meetings. "This is a serious company," he said on my first day, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed like a judge who had already reached a verdict. "Not a playground for fantasies." I nodded. I always nod first. I was raised to believe that if you work hard enough and stay polite, people eventually notice. That respect is something you earn quietly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I told myself he was testing me. Some bosses are rough at the beginning. Some people mistake authority for cruelty. I could handle it. I'd handled worse. The first week passed in a blur of onboarding documents, outdated manuals, and being excluded from conversations that clearly involved my work. I was given tasks without context and deadlines without explanations. When I asked questions, he sighed loudly, as if my curiosity physically pained him. "Figure it out," he'd say. "That's how we learn here." But when I did figure things out, when I brought finished work or suggestions, he acted surprised. Not impressed. Surprised. Like a dog had suddenly spoken in full sentences. There were signs I ignored. The way he introduced everyone else by title but referred to me as help. The jokes he made about kids fresh out of nowhere thinking they know numbers. The way the room went quiet when I entered meetings, then resumed talking once I sat down, like I'd become invisible furniture. Still, I told myself it was normal. Offices have hierarchies. Someone always has to be at the bottom. I stayed late. I double-checked everything. I learned names, processes, unspoken rules. I watched how people laughed at his jokes a second too late, how they avoided eye contact when he raised his voice, how no one ever contradicted him, even when he was wrong. And he was wrong. A lot. That was the part that confused me the most. For someone so confident, so loud, so dismissive, he made careless mistakes. He skipped details. He rounded numbers that shouldn't be rounded. He dismissed risks because acknowledging them would mean admitting uncertainty. I noticed. I wrote notes. I didn't say anything yet. Because I was new. Because I was the girl. Because I still believed that if I waited for the right moment, if I presented things carefully enough, he would listen. I didn't know then that there would never be a right moment. I didn't know that the trash can in the conference room would become a symbol. At the end of that first month, I still thought I was there to build something. In reality, I was there to be taught a lesson I never asked for. So here's where it really started. The moment I stopped being just invisible and became entertaining. By the third week, I finally understood the workflow well enough to see a crack in it. A small one, but obvious once you noticed it. Numbers were being duplicated between two reports that were later merged, which meant projections were inflated on paper and then, mysteriously, collapsed at the end of the quarter. Everyone complained about it in private, in the kitchen, in whispers, with eye rolls and passive jokes about management math. I didn't complain. I calculated. I stayed late one evening, long after most of the lights went off. The office at night is honest. No performances, no laughter time to please someone important. Just the hum of servers and the faint smell of burnt coffee. I pulled the raw data, cross-checked it, cleaned it, and rebuilt the model from scratch. No fancy language, no buzzwords, just numbers lined up the way they were supposed to be. It took me hours. I remember my neck hurting and my eyes burning, but also that quiet excitement you get when something finally makes sense, when chaos turns into structure. I printed the calculations the next morning. 3 pages. Clean. Simple. Highlighted where it mattered. I waited for the weekly team meeting. These meetings were his stage. He liked standing instead of sitting, pacing slowly like a professor who hated his students. Everyone else kept their laptops open but never typed. We all knew the rules. Don't interrupt. Don't disagree. Don't suggest unless asked. I wasn't asked. I still spoke. I noticed something in the quarterly projections, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Calm. Not challenging. There's a duplication issue that might be affecting. He didn't even look at me. He smiled first. That was the worst part. Not an angry smile, an amused one. Oh, he said, turning toward the rest of the team. Another brilliant idea? A couple of people shifted in their chairs. Look at how people with no experience try to save the economy, he continued, laughing lightly, like he'd just made a clever joke instead of a public execution. I felt heat crawl up my neck. Still, I held out the pages. I ran the numbers, I said. If we adjust this input and... He finally took the paper. For a second, my heart actually lifted. This was it. The moment he'd glance, realize I wasn't wasting time, maybe even nod. Instead, he crumpled it. Not aggressively. Casually. Like it wasn't worth the effort to be angry at. He tossed it into the trash can next to the table. There, he said. Problem solved. Some people laughed. Not loudly. That quiet, nervous laughter people use when they want to be included but not responsible. The kind that says, I'm not with you, but I'm not against him either. No one looked at me. I stood there for a second too long. Long enough to feel stupid. Long enough to realize my hands were shaking. Anything else? He asked, already turning back to the screen. I sat down. The rest of the meeting blurred together. Words passed over me without meaning. Charts flipped. Decisions were made that contradicted the data I'd just shown, but no one objected. When it ended, people packed up quickly. Chairs scraped. Laptops snapped shut. A few avoided my eyes. One woman gave me a tight smile that meant don't take it personally. Another whispered, he's like that with everyone, as if that made it better. I went back to my desk in silence. The trash can was emptied later that day. I watched the cleaner pull out the bag, tie it, and replace it with a fresh one. My idea disappeared with coffee cups and lunch wrappers. I told myself it was a one-time thing, a bad introduction, a misread of timing. I should have waited. I should have spoken to him privately. I should have been smarter. That's the thing about humiliation in offices. It trains you to blame yourself first. By the end of that day, I'd rewritten the idea 3 different ways in my head, softer each time, less confident, less me. I still believed I could fix it. I didn't realize yet that this wasn't about the idea at all. After that meeting, something shifted. Not outwardly. No HR emails, no dramatic confrontations, but in the small daily mechanics of how I was treated. Like a door quietly closing and locking without making a sound. The humiliation stopped being an event and became a system. Every meeting followed the same script. I'd prepare, knowing full well what would happen, and still hoping this time might be different. That's another thing people don't tell you. Hope doesn't disappear after the first slap. It fades slowly, stubbornly, humiliating you all over again for even existing. I'd start speaking. He'd interrupt. Not aggressively, not even loudly, just enough to erase me. We don't have time for that. This isn't relevant. Let's hear from someone who understands the business. Sometimes he didn't interrupt at all. Sometimes he let me finish, nodded thoughtfully, and then said, "Right," before turning to someone else and asking them to explain the exact same thing I'd just said. When they repeated it, often clumsily, he praised them for their insight. "See? That's how you explain things." Once I actually tested it. I shared an idea quietly with a coworker before the meeting. Nothing groundbreaking, just a small optimization. During the meeting, I stayed silent. 10 minutes later, he presented my idea as his own discovery, and the room reacted like he'd pulled a rabbit out of a hat. I felt sick. Coffee became my assigned role. Not officially, of course. No one ever wrote it down. But every time the CEO or a senior manager was expected, my boss would glance at me and say, "You know what to do." Once, I didn't move immediately. I was in the middle of explaining a discrepancy in a report. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you deaf?" he asked calmly, "or just slow?" The room went quiet. I stood up and got the coffee. He liked doing things publicly. That was his favorite part. If you're going to humiliate someone, witnesses matter. A private insult is forgettable. A public one teaches discipline, not just to the victim, but to everyone watching. He threw my printed work away more than once, always into the same trash can, always with a comment. Recycling, minimalism, clutter-free thinking. People stopped reacting. That scared me more than the laughter. When humiliation becomes normal, it stops shocking. It just settles, like dust. My behavior changed. I noticed it before anyone else did. I spoke less. When I did speak, my voice sounded smaller, even to me. I started second-guessing things I knew were correct. I reread emails 5 times before sending them, terrified of giving him another excuse. At home, I replayed conversations in my head like crime scene footage. If I'd said it differently, if I'd waited, if I'd smiled more, if I'd been quieter. Sleep became shallow. I woke up already tired, already bracing myself. What hurt the most wasn't even him. It was the way the team adapted around him. How people leaned away from me in meetings, not physically, but socially, as if humiliation were contagious. How no one defended me. Not once. Not even when he was objectively wrong. Especially then. I realized something brutal around that time. The office didn't just tolerate his behavior. It depended on it. His cruelty created a hierarchy where everyone else survived by staying just slightly above the target. And I was the target. Still, I kept working. Harder somehow. Nights. Weekends. I told myself competence was my shield. That numbers didn't care who presented them. I was wrong. Because this wasn't about competence. It was about control. And once someone decides you exist to be diminished, nothing you produce will ever be allowed to stand. By the end of that month, humiliation had become routine, predictable, almost boring. And that's when the real damage started. If this were a movie, this is where the background music would change. Not dramatic yet, just uneasy. like something is off, but no one wants to say it out loud. The numbers started misbehaving. At first, it was small things: a client delaying payment, a forecast that suddenly needed adjustment, a meeting rescheduled because we're still aligning internally. Corporate language is great at hiding panic. It wraps fear in neutral verbs and calls it strategy. But I could see it, because I lived in the spreadsheets everyone else skimmed. Margins were shrinking faster than expected. Costs were bleeding into places they shouldn't. Departments were blaming each other in emails carefully copied to the right people. No one wanted ownership. Everyone wanted plausible deniability. My boss got louder. That's how he reacted to stress. By expanding. More meetings, more speeches, more aggressive confidence. He talked about temporary turbulence and market noise, waved his hands over charts he clearly hadn't studied, and shut down anyone who asked inconvenient questions. Especially me. Not now. Wrong priorities. Stay in your lane. So I stayed in my lane. Quietly. At night. I started reworking the budgets after hours. Not because anyone asked me to, but because I couldn't not see the problem anymore. Once you notice the pattern, it's impossible to unsee it. Like realizing a song is out of tune, every note after that hurts. The issue wasn't one big mistake. It was dozens of small ones layered on top of each other, redundant processes, legacy assumptions no one had challenged in years, numbers being copied forward because that's how it's always been done. Comfortable lies. I stripped it all down, rebuilt the projections from zero. No politics, no hierarchy, just logic. It took days. I brought dinner to my desk. I watched the cleaning crew come and go. I stopped noticing the time. There was a strange calm in it, like solving a puzzle while the building burned quietly around you. And then it clicked. There was a way out. Not a miracle. Not something that would make everyone happy, but a restructuring that could stop the hemorrhaging long enough to stabilize. Painful in the short term, effective in the long one. I stared at the final numbers for a long time. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with certainty. This worked. I knew it did. I checked it again and again. This wasn't an idea anymore. It was a solution. I printed the calculations. More pages this time, annotated, clear, impossible to dismiss without actually reading them. I hesitated outside his office longer than I want to admit. I already knew how this could go. I had muscle memory for humiliation by now. But something felt different. The crisis was real. Even he couldn't ignore it forever. If there was ever a moment where logic might win over ego, this was it. I knocked. "Come in," he said sharply. I stepped inside, heart racing, papers held tightly in my hands like a shield. I started explaining before he could interrupt me. I talked faster than usual, afraid of silence, afraid of being cut off mid-sentence. He listened, or at least pretended to. When I finished, there was a pause, just long enough for hope to creep in again. Then he sighed. "Do you know what your problem is?" he asked, leaning back. I didn't answer. "You think effort equals value," he continued. "It doesn't. Authority does." He didn't look at the pages. Not once. "I don't have time for amateur crisis fantasies," he said, standing up and opening the door. "We'll handle this at the top." I walked out without saying anything. My legs felt hollow, like I'd left them somewhere else. That night, I sat at my desk long after everyone else had gone home. The office was dark again, honest again. I wondered for the first time if staying silent had stopped being professionalism and started becoming self-betrayal. And I wondered how much damage would be done before someone finally listened. I didn't know then that the crisis was about to peak. And that, ironically, it would be my humiliation that put me in the room when it did. The crisis didn't announce itself with sirens. It arrived quietly, wrapped in calendar invites and urgent sync emails sent way too early in the morning. That day, the office felt different the moment I walked in. People weren't chatting near the coffee machine. No forced smiles. No small talk about weather or weekends. Everyone moved faster, eyes glued to screens, shoulders tense. Fear has a posture. Once you recognize it, you see it everywhere. Around 10, an assistant whispered that there would be an executive meeting. Closed door. Mandatory for department heads. I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't. I went back to my desk and tried to work, but concentration was impossible. Emails kept popping up. Clients asking questions no one wanted to answer. Internal messages marked high priority, with no real content behind them. Just pressure. Then, unexpectedly, my boss appeared at my desk. "Bring the latest budget summaries," he said. "And coffee." "No, please." No eye contact. I gathered the documents. As my fingers brushed the folder, I hesitated. My calculations were there too. The ones he had dismissed the night before. I stood there for a second, arguing with myself in silence. Then I added them to the stack. The conference room was already full when we entered. Long glass table, city skyline behind it, and at the head of the table, calm and still, sat the CEO. I'd seen him before only in company-wide emails and staged photos. In person, he was quieter than I expected. No performative authority, just focus, the kind that makes everyone else in the room unconsciously adjust their posture. My boss transformed the moment he crossed the threshold. His voice softened, his back straightened. He smiled, an entirely different smile than the one he used on us. "Good morning," he said warmly. "We're making progress." I placed the coffee cups down carefully, like handling explosives. My boss didn't even acknowledge me. I started to step back. "Wait," he said, glancing at me briefly. "Leave the papers." I did. As I turned to go, something impulsive happened. Something reckless. I slid my solution, the clean, structured one, on top of the pile. Just slightly. Enough to be seen if someone actually looked. He noticed. He always noticed when it came to control. "What's that?" he asked, irritated. "A proposal," I said quietly. "Related to the cash flow issue?" He didn't let me finish. He picked it up, glanced at the first page for maybe a second, less than that, and laughed. "Still doing this?" he said, shaking his head. Then, without even standing up, he crumpled it in his hands and tossed it straight into the trash can beside the table, right in front of everyone. "Leave," he said. "Don't interfere, and don't waste our time with fantasies." Someone cleared their throat. Someone else looked down at their notes. No one said a word. I stood there, frozen. Not because I was shocked. I was past shock, but because something inside me finally cracked. A clean break. Like a thread snapping. I nodded. Because that's what I'd been trained to do. And then I turned to leave. That's when the CEO spoke. "Just a moment." The room stilled instantly. I stopped. He was looking at me. Not at my boss. At me. "I've seen you somewhere before," he said slowly. My boss laughed nervously. "Oh, her? She's new. Junior. Very enthusiastic." The CEO didn't smile. "No," he said, eyes still on me. "That's not it." My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. He leaned back slightly, studying my face like he was turning a memory over in his hands. "Where have I?" He paused. "Yes. Now I remember." My boss went pale. I didn't know yet what he remembered. But for the first time since I'd joined that company, the room wasn't looking at me like I was disposable. It was looking at me like I mattered. And the trash can beside the table suddenly felt very, very heavy. There was a long, uncomfortable silence after the CEO said that. The kind of silence that makes people suddenly fascinated by their notebooks, their phones, the condensation on their water glasses. No one wanted to be visible. No one wanted to be involved. I stood there near the door, half expecting my boss to snap at me to leave already, to restore the old order. He didn't. He couldn't. The CEO kept looking at me, his head tilted slightly, like he was lining up two images in his mind and trying to make them overlap. "I'm sorry," he said finally. His tone wasn't sharp or suspicious. It was almost careful. "What's your name?" I said it. Hearing my name out loud in that room felt strange, like a foreign word. My boss flinched almost imperceptibly, the way people do when something slips out of their control. "You're in finance?" the CEO asked. "Yes," I answered. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. Inside, everything was buzzing. Confusion, dread, a ridiculous spark of hope I didn't trust. He nodded slowly. "And you said you brought a proposal." My boss jumped in immediately. "Nothing relevant," he said quickly, smiling too hard. "Just junior enthusiasm. We're already handling the situation internally." The CEO didn't respond to him. Instead, he stood up. Everyone else stayed seated. No one dared move. He walked around the table, past the neatly stacked reports, past the coffee cups I'd placed there minutes ago, and stopped next to the trash can. I felt my stomach drop. "Please," I thought, irrationally. "Please don't make this worse." He looked inside the trash can for a moment. Then he reached in and pulled out the crumpled paper. My paper. He didn't rush. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it out on the table with both hands, as if it were something fragile, something worth handling properly. The room was completely silent now. He scanned the first page, then the second. Second stretched. My boss shifted his weight. I could see a vein pulsing at his temple. "This is yours?" the CEO asked, without looking up. "Yes," I said. "Did you prepare this on company time?" My boss snapped suddenly, trying to regain ground. "Because if you're doing side work—" "Enough," the CEO said quietly. Not loud, not angry. Final. He kept reading. I watched his face change in small ways, his eyebrows drawing together, his lips pressing into a thin line. He sat down slowly, still holding the pages, as if his legs had decided for him. "This addresses the duplication in the projections," he said, more to himself than to anyone else, "and the cash flow gap." No one answered. "This isn't theory," he continued. "This is actionable." My boss opened his mouth. The CEO finally looked up at him. "How long has this been an issue?" he asked. My boss hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. "Long enough." "We've been monitoring it," he said. "It's complex." The CEO nodded once. Then he turned back to me. "And how long did it take you to put this together?" I thought about the nights alone in the office, the empty coffee cups, the quiet certainty. "A few days," I said. He leaned back in his chair. "I asked earlier where I'd seen you," he said slowly. "And I remember now." My heart skipped. It wasn't pride I felt in that moment, or vindication. It was something stranger. Like the universe had briefly lost interest in humiliating me and decided to pay attention instead. My boss looked confused, uneasy. The CEO folded the paper neatly and placed it in front of him. "We'll talk about this," he said. Then he looked at my boss again. "And we'll also talk about why valuable work is ending up in the trash." No one moved. No one spoke. For the first time since I'd started working there, I wasn't shrinking. I was standing still. And somehow, impossibly, the ground beneath me had stopped moving. The CEO didn't sit back down right away after that. He stayed standing, one hand resting lightly on the table, eyes unfocused for a moment, as if he'd slipped out of the room and into some other memory entirely. "A few years ago," he said slowly, "my daughter ran into the road." Something in his voice changed, not softer, heavier. There was a park nearby. She was playing with a ball. It rolled, and she chased it without looking. He paused. There was a car. Brakes. Screaming. The room felt smaller. I could hear the air conditioner hum, loud and wrong. "I was a few steps behind," he continued. "Too far. Too slow." I knew what was coming before he said it. My stomach twisted. "And you," he said, finally looking straight at me, grabbed her. Every muscle in my body tensed. "You didn't hesitate. You pulled her back so hard she fell. She was crying, furious at you. She didn't understand what almost happened." I remembered it then, fully. The red ball. The sound of tires. The weight of a small body in my arms, shaking. I remembered kneeling down, telling her to stay with her dad, that she was okay now. I remembered not waiting for thanks because there wasn't time. I was late for work that day. "I didn't know who you were," he said. "You didn't tell me your name. You just nodded and left." My boss laughed weakly. That's a coincidence," he said. "I mean," the CEO turned to him. "Is it?" he asked. Silence swallowed the room again. "I've thought about that moment many times," the CEO continued, "about how close we came to losing her, and about the person who stepped in when it mattered. Someone who didn't ask for recognition. Someone who didn't need authority to act." He looked at the crumpled and now smooth pages on the table. "And now," he said, "I see the same pattern." My chest felt tight. I hadn't connected those two parts of my life until that second. The street and the office. The instinct to step forward when something is wrong, even when no one asked you to. My boss cleared his throat. "With all due respect," he said, trying to sound confident, "personal stories aside, we're here to talk about judgment," the CEO cut in. My boss stopped. "About recognizing value," the CEO continued, "and about what happens when people confuse control with leadership." He picked up the papers again. "This," he said, tapping them lightly, "was thrown away, not because it lacked merit, but because of who brought it." I felt exposed, like my entire month at the company had just been laid bare, every quiet humiliation suddenly visible under fluorescent lights. "I want to hear the full explanation," the CEO said, turning to me, "from you." My boss stared at me, eyes sharp, warning. The old reflex kicked in. Keep your head down, don't provoke, survive. Then I remembered the ball rolling into the road. I took a breath, and I started talking. I don't remember standing up, but suddenly I was. My chair scraped softly against the floor, and that small sound felt impossibly loud in the silence. Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward me. Not the polite, distracted glances I was used to. Real attention. The kind that makes your mouth go dry. I started with the numbers. Not defensively, not emotionally. Just the facts. Where the duplication happened. How it snowballed. Why the projections kept lying even when no one meant them to. I pointed to lines, explained assumptions, admitted where the solution would hurt in the short term. I didn't look at my boss. I couldn't afford to. The CEO followed along, occasionally nodding, sometimes stopping me to ask a precise question. Not, "Why did you do this?" but, "What happens if this variable shifts?" Or, "What's the risk threshold here?" Real questions. Adult ones. Halfway through, I noticed something surreal. People were taking notes. Not pretending to. Actually writing. My boss interrupted once. "This is all theoretical," he said sharply. "We can't make decisions based on models built without senior oversight." I paused. Looked at the CEO. He gestured for me to continue. It's not theoretical, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's already happening. The losses just haven't been labeled correctly yet. The CEO leaned forward. How much time do we have? He asked. 2 quarters, I said. Maybe less. That did it. The mood in the room shifted. Not panic. Recognition. That moment when denial collapses because someone finally said the quiet part out loud. When I finished, no one spoke right away. The CEO gathered the pages, straightened them, and placed them carefully in front of him, aligned with the edge of the table. That small, deliberate act felt louder than applause. This, he said, is not trash. My boss's face had gone completely colorless. You threw this away, the CEO continued, calm but deadly. Along with other work, I assume. My boss opened his mouth, then closed it. Tried again. I was maintaining standards, he said. We can't encourage juniors to overstep. You encouraged silence, the CEO replied, and you discouraged initiative. He turned to the rest of the room. How many ideas like this have we lost because someone decided they didn't come from the right mouth? No one answered, which was answer enough. The CEO stood. Here's what's going to happen, he said. He pointed at the paper. This becomes our working model. Then at my boss. You are relieved of bonus eligibility effective immediately. You'll submit a full report of your decision-making processes to my office by end of day. My boss swallowed hard. And you, the CEO said, turning back to me, will work directly with me and the restructuring team until this is resolved. I felt dizzy, not triumphant, not vindicated, just unmoored. Yes, I said. The meeting ended shortly after that. Chairs moved. People stood up slowly like they weren't sure gravity would still work. My boss avoided my eyes completely. As everyone filed out, the CEO stopped me at the door. Thank you, he said quietly, for the numbers, and for my daughter. I nodded. My throat wouldn't cooperate. When I stepped back into the open office, everything looked the same. Desks, screens, coffee cups. But the trash can near the conference room was still there, empty. And for the first time, I didn't feel like that's where I belonged. If you've never watched power drain out of a person in real time, it's hard to explain how unsettling it is. My boss didn't explode. He didn't yell. He didn't even argue after that meeting. He just shrank. Not physically, but in presence. Like someone had turned down a dimmer switch only he could feel. By lunchtime, the office knew. No official announcement, of course. Corporations don't do shame openly unless it's profitable. But information travels faster than emails. Whispers moved through hallways. Slack messages went quiet mid-sentence when I walked by, and people who had barely acknowledged me before suddenly found reasons to smile. How are you? Crazy morning, huh? Let me know if you need anything. It was dizzying. My boss called me into his office that afternoon, the same office where he'd dismissed me, interrupted me, and made me feel small enough to fold into a drawer. He didn't offer me a seat this time. He didn't need to. I assume you're enjoying the attention? He said flatly. I didn't answer. You should be careful, he continued. This kind of visibility doesn't last. People forget how quickly you can fall. I looked at him then. Really looked. There was no authority left in his voice. Just bitterness. Fear. A man who had built his entire identity on being untouchable, suddenly realizing he wasn't. I didn't ask for this, I said calmly. I asked you to read. That landed harder than any insult. He scoffed. Don't be naive. You think this changes anything? Before I could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it and froze. Then he sat down heavily. The CEO's message was short. I saw it reflected faintly in the glass of his desk. Please come to my office. He didn't look at me again as I left. By the end of the day, it was official. His bonus was gone. His authority was under review. Meetings he used to dominate now happened without him. People stopped laughing at his jokes, stopped orbiting him. That kind of isolation is brutal. For me, the consequences were stranger. I was invited into rooms I'd never been allowed in before, asked for my opinion, introduced by name. People listened, not because they suddenly liked me, but because someone above them had decided I was worth listening to. And that hurt in its own way. Because it proved something ugly. Competence had never been the issue. Permission was. I worked late again that night, but it felt different. Not desperate, focused. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged anymore. I was doing the work because it mattered. As I packed up to leave, I passed my boss's office. The lights were off. For the first time, I felt no satisfaction. No revenge. Just a quiet, complicated sadness. Because power didn't make him cruel. It just revealed what he already was. And it revealed something else too. How easily people mistake silence for weakness. I went home knowing the story wasn't over yet, but it had changed direction. And so had I. The days that followed felt unreal, like I was walking through the same office set after the main character had been recast. Nothing had officially changed for most people. Same desks, same schedules, same corporate buzzwords floating around in meetings. But the atmosphere was different. Brittle in a way it hadn't been before. Like everyone had suddenly realized the walls were thinner than they thought. My boss stopped speaking to me entirely. Not openly, not dramatically. He just erased me. If I entered a room, he'd look through me. If someone addressed me in his presence, he'd busy himself with his phone. The man who once controlled the air around him now avoided it, like acknowledging me might finish whatever process had already started. I was reassigned almost immediately. New calendar invites appeared without explanation. Meetings labeled working session with the CEO and a small restructuring group. No grand announcement, no applause, just quiet, decisive movement. The first time I spoke in one of those meetings, my hand still shook. Trauma doesn't evaporate just because the threat is gone. I expected interruption, mockery, that familiar tightening in my chest. It didn't come. People asked follow-up questions. They challenged assumptions respectfully. When I didn't know something, no one used it as a weapon. We adjusted. We moved on. That shouldn't feel extraordinary, but it did. Back at my old desk, coworkers behaved like I'd crossed some invisible border. Some were genuinely kind, awkward apologies, hesitant support. Others were strategic, suddenly interested in my opinion, suddenly friendly. I didn't blame them. Survival rewires people. What surprised me most was how empty the victory felt at first. I'd imagined relief, vindication, maybe even joy. Instead, I felt tired, bone deep, tired, like my body had been braced for impact for months and didn't know how to stand normally anymore. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized myself. Same face, same clothes, but something in my eyes had shifted. Less pleading, more stillness. My boss was officially demoted a week later. No announcement, no farewell email. His office was reassigned. His name disappeared from meeting lists. A quiet administrative death. I saw him once in the hallway after that. He looked smaller somehow, like the building had stopped accommodating him. He nodded stiffly, the way strangers do. I nodded back. That was it. No confrontation, no final speech, no cinematic closure, and oddly enough, that felt right. Because real consequences aren't dramatic. They're permanent. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about how to survive the next meeting. I was thinking about what I wanted to build next. And that scared me more than humiliation ever had. I'm writing this a few months later, from the same desk. in the same building, but it feels like a different life. If you're expecting a neat moral or a motivational poster ending, I don't really have one. What I have is quieter, sharper, earned the hard way. For a long time, I thought the lesson was, stand up for yourself and everything will be fine. That's what people like to say. It sounds clean. It puts responsibility back in your hands. But that wasn't the real lesson. The real lesson was this. Some environments are designed to erase you, no matter how competent, polite, or patient you are. And staying quiet in those environments doesn't make you professional, it makes you convenient. I blamed myself for too long, for not speaking louder, for speaking too soon, for not smiling enough, for caring too much, for caring at all. I thought humiliation was a sign I needed to improve, when in reality it was a sign I was in the wrong place, under the wrong person. Another thing I learned, people don't always side with truth. They side with safety. Most of my coworkers weren't cruel. They were afraid. Afraid to be next. Afraid to lose what little stability they had. Understanding that doesn't excuse their silence, but it helped me stop taking it personally. And here's the part that still makes me uncomfortable to admit. Being proven right didn't heal everything. It didn't erase the nights I couldn't sleep, or the way my voice used to shrink in meetings. It didn't magically restore my confidence. Healing came later, slowly, in moments where no one interrupted me. In meetings where disagreement didn't feel like danger. In realizing I no longer flinched when someone raised their voice. If you're reading this because something similar is happening to you, this is what I wish someone had told me earlier. Document everything. Trust patterns, not apologies. And don't confuse endurance with strength. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't to survive humiliation, it's to refuse to normalize it. I didn't win because I was patient. I didn't win because I waited my turn. I didn't even win because I was right. I won because, at the exact wrong moment, someone finally looked. And because I had something worth seeing when they did. If you're still in the phase where your ideas are being thrown away, literally or figuratively, please know this. Your value doesn't live in their trash can. And one day, whether you stay or leave, you'll build something where no one gets to decide your worth with a crumpled piece of paper. That's not optimism. That's survival.